Welcome to Class 3. In this video we'll be talking about conditionals, which basically boil down to this statement: if this is true, then do this. And we'll also be looking at some conditional animation. Thank you, Shen Osaki. Cool, so first I duplicated my p5.js starter file folder and renamed. Open that up in brackets, and I've got my live preview happening here. So the first thing we're going to do with conditionals is split up our screen into 3 sections, and if our mouse is in the first third, do something. If it's in the second third, do something else, and if it's in the third, do yet another thing. So I'm going to start by use the line function, and I want the x position 1/3, 0 will be the y coordinate, down to the height. So width divided by 3 is my x coordinate for the first point, 0 is the y coordinate. Then I want a straight line down the width on 3, 0 is this point. Width, I'm going to draw a line 2/3 of the way. So I'm just going to go 2 times the width divided by the third, divided by 3, I should say. And that should give me another line there. Cool, so now we can see our thirds. So now I'm going to do some pseudo coding, and all that is writing out stuff in layman's terms, so we don't have to worry about coding right away. We can kind of jot down our ideas of how things should work. So let's say if my mouse is in the first third of the screen, I'm going to make the whole background white, and then a shade of grey, and then a darker shade of grey if it's in the last third. So let's start by writing out some pseudocode. I'm going to comment it out so it doesn't affect how my code runs. So I'm going to say if mouse in first third, then white screen. And I'm going to copy this out. If mouse in second third, then light gray. And if it's in the last third, then dark gray. Cool. So let's start writing this out with some actual code. The way a conditional looks is like this. We have if, and then the thing we're going to be testing to see if it's true, we put in brackets here. And then the thing we want to do, we put in these curly brackets. So for my first if statement, I'm going to look for if the mouse is in the first third. If you remember from when we talked about system variables, we have this mouse x variable, which looks at the x coordinate of my mouse on the screen. So I'm going to say, if that makes sense. So at the moment, mouse x is 0, and as I move it across to this line, now it's at 1/3. So this statement is saying if third. Once it's past here, this won't be true anymore, and then we'll see what happens when stuff is not true. And then what do we want to do? If the mouse is in the first third, make the screen white. So in these curly brackets, I'm going to make the screen white with background equals 255. Cool. And now you see I save this and it updates over here, and it turns white right away. So what's happening there is, even though I didn't have my mouse on the screen yet, as soon as you reload a page, P5 assumes that your mouse is at 0, 0. So that's something to be careful of. Even though my mouse could have been over here when I reload the page, it turns white right away anyway. Also, I've got no other conditions happening, so it's remaining white. But let's change that now. I could just say else. So if the mouse is in the first third of the screen, make the background white. Else just means if this is not happening, else do this. And same thing in these curly brackets, I'm going to say, make the background 0. I could do, oops, and save. And now if I'm outside of this first third, it's black. And if I go within the first third, it turns white. Also, you'll notice my lines are disappearing. I'm going to put these at the bottom, oops, and now they'll be on top of everything. And if you notice, these lines are not within these curly brackets. If they were, then they would only be drawing when these things are happening. So just got to make sure we know what's happening with our curly brackets. Often what will happen is a student will end up, or I will end up with lots of ifs and else everywhere, and I'll accidentally forget one of these brackets, curly brackets. And let's see what happens if I comment out one bracket. Now I've just got a white screen, nothing's happening. If I check the JavaScript console with Option Command J, we'll see that it has an error, and it says unexpected end of input. So whenever you see this error, unexpected end of input, you can see it's pointing me to our sketch, line 31. If we look there, it's just the end of our page. So it's not very helpful as a pointer. But what you should look for if you ever get unexpected end of input is if you have any missing brackets. A good way to check for that is when you click on the inside of a bracket, it shows you its partner bracket. So say in function setup, I click on this bracket, it shows me that my function setup does end there, and draw, that block ends down here, and the same for my if statement and my else statement. So just be careful with your brackets because things can break pretty easily. I also have some random error that's not affecting anything, so I'm just going to ignore that. Cool, so we got our first if statement happening and then something else happening. But let's add in another statement, an else if statement. So this is when you want another condition in comparison to a previous condition. So that will make sense in a sec. Let's do the second one. If the mouse is in the second third. So I'm going to say if mouse x is less than 2 times width divided by 3. And we want a light gray. So let's go 150, I guess. And now first third, my background's white. Second third, it's gray. And the third third, I haven't done anything yet, so let's fix that up now. Instead of writing out another else if statement, I can just put in an else statement now, because there's only one other condition possible that's left. If the mouse is in the last third, then make a dark gray screen. So I'm just going to make the background for the last third be 50, or maybe something 90, I don't know. Cool, so we got white, gray, and dark gray. Awesome, that's exactly what I wanted to do. Now I'm going to delete my pseudocode, and it all looks nice. So let's also do something else. We don't have to only do one thing in each conditional. So let's say we want to draw an ellipse here, a circle here, and a square here when our mouse is in these thirds of the screen. So we can like add a million things into each of these if, else, ifs, and elses. So let's draw an ellipse. I'm gonna put it at somewhere within the first third of the screen. Let's go width divided by 6. And then I'm going to put it halfway down the screen, height divided by 2. And then I'm going to give it a size of 100 wide and how high? Let's go 300 high. So now that ellipse only appears when we're in the first third of the screen. Now I'm going to draw what did I say? A square? I don't know. Let's put this in the middle of the screen, width onto, height onto, and make it 200 by 200. Why not? And now that, and I'm going to change my image mode I'm actually going to do this for the entire project. Sorry, not my image mode, my rect mode to center. Just because I often want to draw my rectangles from their center point, not from the top left corner. So you can use setup as a kind of place to set your preferences for all of your styling. Cool, that's in the middle. And now let's draw a circle with, I want it in the 5th, 6th of the screen. So 5 times width on 6, height on 2, halfway down the page. And let's make it 200 as well. So now we've got this happening. Cool. That's quite nice. And now let's move on to some conditional animation. So I'm going to add, let's just say a rect. And let's start it at the left of the screen. So I'm just going to put it at 0, halfway down the screen. Or maybe let's not make it clash with our other shape. So let's put it up higher. Let's go height divided by 5 or something. I don't know. We'll see how that looks. And let's make it longer than it is high. So I'm going to go 200 by 100. Sweet. And I've got this rectangle peeking in on the screen. Let's make it higher. Let's go width divided by 7 and make it less tall. This isn't really necessary, but now it's not going to clash with my ellipse. Cool. So now I'm going to, just like we did with our first animation tutorial, use a variable to move this rectangle across the screen. So I'm going to call it rectx. So remember, to use a variable, you have to first declare it, rectx, and let's initiate it at 0. So that should look the same. Sweet, that looks the same. And now I'm going to make it move to the right. So if you remember, we can increase every time this draw loop comes back around our variables by some amount. Let's just see what it looks like if I add 1 to it on every frame. Sweet. So now it's zooming across our canvas. I'm going to make it a little bit faster. 20 pixels per. Sweet. So now it's gone in like 1.5 seconds or whatever. So a conditional animation is basically when we want something to occur, and then if something else happens, we want that animation to be affected somehow. So the example we're going to do is, I'll write it in pseudocode. If rectangle leaves screen, put it back on right of screen. Cool. So if this happens, then do this. So the way I'm going to do that, well, how do we know if our rectangle leaves the screen? Well, we have this rectx happening, this variable we've created. So I can use a conditional and say, if the x coordinate of my rectangle is greater than the width of the screen, then, curly brackets, we're going to put rectx back to, well, we could put it back to 0, but then it'll kind of flash onto the screen up here. So I'm going to put it to negative, how long did I make it? 100. So I'm going to do negative 100. Or to be safe, I'm just going to say negative 200. So now what will happen, the rectangle will be drawn, rectx will advance by 20 in each frame. Then if the rectangle, its x coordinate is greater than the width, so if x goes off the screen, then we're going to redraw this rectangle. Oh, sorry, we're going to reset its x coordinate to negative 200. So let's see if that works. Sweet. So it's going to the right of the screen. Once it's off screen, well, actually you can see it's blinking out a bit. So we should say if it's greater than the width plus its length, just to make sure it's all the way off the screen. Then reset it. Sweet. So now it goes all the way off the right hand side of the screen. We reset its x coordinate to be off the left side of the screen, and it zooms back around. Cool. So that's the first part of class 3. See you in the next one.